industry likes to pretend the big sounds were planned. The right guitar, the right amp, the right player, the right moment. But a lot of the sounds that changed rock came from the opposite. A broken speaker, a guitar played backwards, a cheap pawn shop instrument that would not stay in tune, a pickup wired wrong, a hand that could not feel the strings anymore, an amp pushed past what it was built to do. Not the perfect gear, the wrong gear.
I just got a razor blade and I started to cut the cone of the speaker. I don't know why.
And he says, all right, beat it to death, and I want you to tell me what you think of it.
Cut the bones off, and then they said, you might as well forget playing.
The guitar that I wanted to play did not exist.
And so I found my sound when I stopped looking for my sound.
I never really thought, that I was going to be a guitar player so much. I just sort of liked that it was a noise machine of sorts.
It definitely established this idea that a guitar didn't have to sound like a guitar.
That is the story. The wrong thing, in the right hands, became the sound. Before rock guitar had rules, players were already fighting the instrument. It was not loud enough. It did not sustain enough. It did not move right. It did not look right. It did not survive the stage. So before the guitar became a symbol, it had to become a machine.
I've got to make my guitar louder. I started out with a log. It's just a 4x4. So I put wings on it, went back the following week, and everybody went crazy over it. So I said, my God, the people listen with their eyes.
There it is. Even the future had to look familiar before people would accept it. A plank of wood could solve the problem. But a plank of wood with guitar-shaped wings could change the world. And once the guitar became something people could understand on sight, the next question was what the body could do with it.
What kind of music is it? I said, I don't know, man, I'm just playing it.
So he wanted to design a guitar that was a little more comfortable and a little easier to jump around like a madman. And he made a bunch of them over the years out of anything, suitcases, other instrument cases I've seen, whatever you can imagine.
So already, the guitar is becoming more than notes. It is volume, it is shape, it is movement, it is attitude. And then Link Wray found out what happens when a room full of kids hears something nobody has a name for yet.
Rock and roll at that time was huge.
Yeah.
Everywhere you went, the kids were just like a storm. So instead of milk doing that, he just jumped on stage, Link, play me a stroll. I said, I don't know a stroll. Doug said, I know the beat behind one. And my brother Ray, he grabs the microphone, right? Because the only mic they had back in those days was just a singer. They didn't mic the amps or anything. So he just took the mic, stick it down here like this, right? So I just took my amplifier and turned it wide open. And I had no premier amplifier, right? So I just turned the tremolo on. So all I could really hear was just me and Doug. I was doing. Yeah, and the kids, they just went ape. And we had to play about 4 times for the kids. They kept hollering and screaming, banging on the stage, Play that weird song, play that weird song.
Before the industry knew what it was, the audience knew what it felt like. The weird song worked. Not because it was polished, because it was dangerous. A few years later, Dick Dale would take that same problem, volume, and make it big enough to destroy equipment.
So I'm playing drums on the guitar. Hi, my name is Dick Dale. I'm a surfer, I got no money, can you help me out?
Leo gave me this right-handed Stratocaster.
He goes, how come you're holding the guitar like that? It's upside down backwards.
I had to transpose my head to my hand.
And he says, all right, beat it to death, and I want you to tell me what you think of it.
That is not a normal guitar demo. That is an instrument being sent into war.
And it sounded loud in the little factory, but when I put it on the stage in front of 1,000 people, the bass would just go away. He keeps giving me amplifiers. I keep it on fire. The speakers would catch on fire. They did start smoking. Finally, after about 48 to 50 speakers lamps that I just torched and blew up, my smallest gauge is a 16. They call them bridge cables. They call them coat hangers, railroad tracks.
Leo stood in the middle of 4,000 people and he said to Freddie, "Now I know what Dick Dale's trying to tell me."
Back to the drawing board. And he created an output transformer. All the techs call it the Dick Dale output transformer. We wanted a large speaker. We wanted a larger magnet, a 15-inch speaker with a larger magnet on it, put in an aluminum dust cover because I wanted to hit the pick of the pick.
Dick Dale forced the gear to get stronger. Dave Davies went the other direction. He found the sound inside something already broken.
I didn't really consider the Kinks to be part of the story of metal. But then after doing some research, I realized that the sound of Dave Davies' guitar became a blueprint for heavy metal guitar.
Well, we had that sound quite 6 months before we recorded, before Uri was around. I used to experiment with the guitar, but the guitar sounds are very limited. They're just tone control, volume. That was about it. I came across this little amp in the shop up the road, and it was called an El Pico, and I think it was like a 5-inch speaker. I just got a razor blade, and I started to cut the cone of the speaker. I don't know why. I plugged it in and it made that amazing sound. And now I've got this really gritty, twangy, woody sound in my amp with the speaker slashed. So this chord now sounds immense. So it was like discovering something. I felt more like an inventor than a musician. So that made me feel invincible. Maybe the world isn't that scary. Maybe I've got a fighting chance.
That is what distortion did, before people could buy it in a box. It gave small players a bigger body. It gave fear a weapon. And sometimes the thing that breaks is not the amp. Sometimes it is the player.
Giant, huge press, massive, and it just took the ends. I actually pulled them off. As I pulled my hand back, it sort of pulled them off, cut the bones off, and then they said, "You might as well forget playing." And I wouldn't accept that there wasn't some way around it that I could be able to play. And so I made my own tips. I got a washing up bottle, a plastic bottle, and melted it down into a ball, and then I got a hot soldering iron and would drill a hole out in it and fit it over my finger. So there's this big ball on my finger. And I had this old leather jacket from my rocker days. And so I decided to cut it up and put a bit of try this leather, and it was great because it was a really old jacket. You can't feel anything.
Yeah.
You can't feel the guitar.
And then the amount of nerves that we have in our fingertips.
And it was painful. It was painful. So I used to try and put tape underneath it so it'd buffle it a bit. Which of course there was no light strings in them days. They were all heavy, quite heavy really. And I bought some banjo strings, and I used the first banjo strings because they were light, and then I dropped the gauge down so that it'd make basically a light gauge set. Light gauge strings, you can't do that. I said, you can. I said, I've got them, I use them. He went, no, they'll never sell. It's ironic, you have to sort of prove everything before anybody will accept and have a go at it. To tuning down and using thicker strings for tuning down and just trying different ideas, to create a different sound.
Tony Iommi did not sit down and design heavy metal on a napkin. He made the guitar playable again. The result was darker, lower, heavier. A workaround became a genre. Money creates another kind of limit. No guitar, no budget, no perfect tool waiting on a wall. So you build.
The basic thing was I didn't have any money, so I couldn't buy any of those guitars. So I could look at them in brochures, you know, the Fenders and the Gibsons or whatever, even the Hofners, who were the sort of English copies, emulations of those, and I couldn't afford any of them. So it was like, make a guitar, and that's the only way. Having taken up the challenge, it was, let's make something better than anything that's ever been out there. You know, it was made out of all sorts of stuff that was just lying around. You know, the neck is Pete probably told you, is a piece of an old fireplace, which was 100 years old at the time, and you can just about see the wormholes that I filled up with matchsticks here. This is all done with hand tools. First time it was ever used was at Molesey Boat Club, which is on the banks of the Thames in somewhere near Putney, in England. And my group was 1984, and I got up and played it, and it was amazing. It was quite stupendous, and that became my instrument from that day forward. Well, this is the only guitar really that I made and functioned with, and it became a part of me.
A guitar made from an old fireplace becomes part of Brian May. A few years later, Eddie Van Halen goes looking for a different impossible guitar. Brian wants to build something better than what he cannot afford. Eddie wants two guitars that were never meant to be one guitar.
What I was trying to do was cross-pollinate a Gibson with a Fender. I didn't have the money, and the guitar that I wanted to play did not exist. It was that simple. The body cost me $50, and the neck cost me $80.
And I proceeded to take a chisel and a hammer and make a hole big enough for a Gibson pickup. I had no clue how to hook it back up. I wondered if it would work if I just hooked the humbucking pickup straight up to one knob, and it worked.
A lot of what I do is really trial and error, you know. But I do know where I want to get, and sometimes I ruin a lot of stuff getting there.
That line could be the motto of the whole thing. You know where you want to get. You ruin stuff getting there. But sometimes the answer is not more parts. Sometimes it is less.
Learn the feel and the touch of that string. Learn that, then you can add the effects later on, you know. So, I mean, I've always looked upon the silence and as that as being an extra tool, and it doesn't cost a lot.
Right, yeah, it's cheap. Silence is cheap.
Yeah.
I found I was getting so sort of jaded on Setzer and the regular tuning stuff that I really needed something to like perk me up and say start again sort of thing. Because with a 5-string guitar, you've only got 3 notes. Because of the limitations, you've got to find other ways out. And you start searching.
That is the thing. The limitation does not just block you, it makes you search. Keith finds it by removing a string. Tom Morello finds it by giving up on the guitar he thought he wanted.
Spent a lot of money on the crappiest guitar that anyone has ever played. It was super disappointing. It was unplayable. It sounded absolutely terrible. And I finally just gave up. This is the equipment I've got. This is the sound that I have. It's not what I envisioned at all, but this sound is just going to be my sound, creating with the instrument that I have, not continuing to worry about an instrument that I don't have. And so I found my sound when I stopped looking for my sound. But if you're practicing police helicopters, you're not going to sound like Eddie Van Halen. It's like I would make a mistake, and if you play that 16 times in a row, all of a sudden it becomes art. It wasn't perfect, but it worked perfectly for me. Its imperfections I was able to turn into music.
Keith removes the extra string. Morello accepts the bad guitar. Both end up with a language nobody else had. That is the bridge into the next wave. Because by the time you get to Sonic Youth and My Bloody Valentine, the goal is no longer making the guitar sound better. The goal is making the guitar stop acting like a guitar.
I was never in a cover band. I would open strum the guitar, no matter where it was. It could have been a traditional tuning, it could have just been like picked up and that's where it was. And I would slowly be moving the pegs up and down until I found an open chord that I thought was awesome. And that's how a lot of the SY tunings were established. We thought it sounded good, like to put any kind of implement, whether it's a thin drumstick or a car antenna or a TV antenna, even like a pen, you could sort of put beneath the strings here. You can really overdrive it and create like this kind of industrial music. Let's just take out all the electronics and just hotwire it straight to the volume.
A cheap guitar that will not stay in tune can be garbage, or it can be a map.
At first, when we started, we just had all kinds of just like no-name jerry-rigged guitars because they were inexpensive. And we would buy them and they didn't really sound right in traditional tuning, as I was saying earlier. So we started modifying them then, and we started sort of doing things such as putting different implements underneath like the 12th fret.
Sonic Youth followed the flaw. Kevin Shields followed the wobble.
Every time I have new songs with different tunings, it's just kind of like, what am I going to do? This guitar kind of suits what's happening. And one of them is a Jazzmaster. It was a 64, a red 64, and it just happened that the drummer one was set. Some of them they can all be a bit different, but his one was just set that it was kind of unusually high, just by pure luck. And then in this 2 hours later, I did a song called Slow, which was the first time I did that melted kind of effect. I put it through a reverse reverb, thought, that sounds good. And I thought, turn the tone down. I thought, wow, it sounds totally like some weird tape, sort of copy of a copy of a copy. And it all happened in like one afternoon. It has to be very loose so that when I'm playing, I'm not actually, if I don't want to, it doesn't actually affect nothing's happening, you know what I mean? People's brains, they need to hear where it comes up into tune. Your brain hears the tune, hears where it should be, and it kind of ignores the fact that actually 50% of the time everything I do is out of tune. It definitely established this idea that a guitar didn't have to sound like a guitar.
By now, the wrong gear has become something else. Not a problem, a method. The next generation does not just accept wrong gear. They choose it. Before Sonic Youth, before My Bloody Valentine, before noise became an underground language, the Velvet Underground had already cracked open the door. Lou Reed wasn't just thinking about songs, he was thinking about sound as something physical.
I know the way I like things to sound, so I could hear where it was missing. I'm very emotionally affected by sound. Sound is more than just noise, and ordered sound is music.
And he wanted rock and roll to carry more than hooks. He wanted street writing, fiction, ugliness, humor, and real life inside the guitars and drums.
I've been interested more or less with what would happen if a Raymond Chandler wrote a rock and roll song. I mean, I've always hoped to combine a certain literate thoughtfulness that wouldn't put people off rock records. You could still have fun with the guitars and drums, but if you leaned in, there would be not Dostoevsky, but there would be something of substance there that you might find, if not illuminating, at least interesting.
Then John Cale brought in a different pressure. Classical training, viola, drone, and the avant-garde rubbing against rock and roll.
There's one side of me that really has classical leanings. There's another side that what I love rock and roll, and some of it is entirely classical, some of it is entirely rock and roll. But then there's a gray area in between.
John was a trained keyboard and viola player, so meshing that with what was more or less straight ahead rock was a really interesting thing.
That gray area became the Velvet's natural habitat.
One reason I always loved Lou's guitar playing was his use of feedback. It wasn't just noise. He knew what he was doing.
And I was interested in having the electric guitar sound like a saxophone section.
With Sister Ray, it came the time to really show what we were like live. It was really a question of just turning up your amps and blasting away.
The engineer left. One of the engineers said, I don't have to listen to this. I'll put it in record and I'm leaving. When you're done, come and get me.
That sound probably should have been cleaned up or softened or explained or killed in the studio. Instead, Andy Warhol accidentally became the shield.
The advantage of having Andy Warhol as a producer was that because he was Andy Warhol, they left everything in its pure state. And they would say, "Is that okay, Mr. Warhol?" And he'd say, "Oh, yeah." And so they didn't change anything. And so right at the very beginning, we experienced what it was like to be in the studio and record things our way and have essentially total freedom.
He was a catalyst.
He was a protector.
I didn't want to use the same tool that everyone else was using. Nobody had enough money to pay for a real guitar. And I want to try to get somewhere new to have an instrument that you can fight a little bit. Cheap microphones, the cheap equipment I had was very important to getting the sound of the soulfulness of what you're trying to put down.
I'm just a dude from the desert. I played the same amp since I was like 13 years old, basically. I've always liked to use what I think is the wrong shit incorrectly. That's been my style. But I don't have a Marshall and I don't have a Les Paul.
Yeah.
I don't have a Strat, and there's nothing wrong with those things. I just figured, okay, that's covered. The thing I got from all that is they did their own thing and I should too.
Early players used the wrong gear because they had no choice. Later players used the wrong gear because the right gear already had too much history attached to it. The classic combination still worked, that was the problem. They already sounded like somebody else.
In the late 80s, guitar virtuoso Paul Gilbert of Mr. Big wanted to push his solos past the limits of human biology. He wanted a picking speed that was physically impossible for a human wrist to achieve. So, he completely bypassed traditional technique. He went out and bought a cordless Makita power drill. He didn't modify his guitar. He modified the tool to attain speeds exceeding 3,000 rotations per minute. Gilbert modded his hardware and equipped the drill with a custom bit. While he originally started the trick by gluing 3 standard plastic picks to the spinning metal, he eventually upgraded his arsenal. He attached 4 thin plectrums, fanning them out perfectly so that the drill acted as a relentless, mechanized strumming machine. During live shows and on the recording of the song Daddy, Brother, Lover, Little Boy, he flipped the drill switch, held the heavy motor directly over his pickups, and ground those spinning picks against his strings. It created a terrifyingly fast, buzzing guitar tone that no human being could ever replicate by hand.
Prince cuts through all of this in a different way. Not by saying gear does not matter, by reminding everybody that the part has to matter first.
Prince's funk rhythm playing was like nobody else is on the planet. All those notes don't translate in a big arena like that. I'll kick your butt just holding one long high note. One of the biggest things I learned from him in taking a solo is to tell a story. You're talking loud, but you ain't saying nothing. Don't do all that scratching, because with a drummer, it's just a lot of clutter. Space. Yes, space is when he set his guitar down. He wanted to hear that funk exactly as if he was still playing. If you play a wrong note, do it twice.
That connects straight back to Morello. A mistake can become a part. A wrong note can become intention, but only if you own it. And then Prince accidentally proves that even legendary tone sometimes comes from stage survival.
That rig sounded so good. Anyway, it went up in flames one day. I said, plug him into my amp. My guitar sounds amazing tonight, doesn't it? He went to his grave never knowing that he was playing through my rig. Takumi knew how to get the sound that Prince liked through his pedals and any amp.
So yes, the gear matters. The player, the tech, the room, the part, and the decision matter more. And sometimes, the gear that matters most is not the best thing in the room. It is the thing that stayed.
It's a Martin Classic N20. I had a ball-in amp, a ball-in guitar, a ball-in pickup. I busted that guitar. I said, well, I got this little Martin Classical up here that I take the stuff out of yours and put it in this one. So I bought it sight unseen over the telephone. And it's the greatest guitar, the best sound that I've ever heard. The classical guitar is not supposed to have a pick guard on it, so it doesn't. It's too many Whiskey Rivers, I guess it's worn a hole in there. No. Party. We'll both wear out about the same time, I figured.
That is not a guitar collection, that is a companion. Neil Young has his version.
I always liked the old instruments, and I played it through this amp, and the amp just took off. You didn't even have to play the guitar. You just plug it in, and then suddenly the strings all started going. It just fed back for days. And I traded Jim Messina, a funky Gretsch that I had, a second Gretsch. I traded it for my Les Paul, my black Les Paul. So I got that in 1968, and I still got it now.
And Brian Setzer has the teenage version. A guitar bought for the look before anybody knew what it would become.
Orange guitar, Gretsch, $100. I wanted to look like Eddie Cochran. I didn't know if it sounded any good. And all the electronics were in the shoebox. No case. I took the guitar in one hand, the shoebox in the other hand, and I've owned it since I was 17 years old. It's come back and forth. It's been stolen. It's been left on taxi cabs. It's been lost on airplanes. It's been left places because everybody was drunk. And it's made its way back to me every time. And I took matchbook covers and I folded them up. And I stuck them in there and put the screw down so they're raised up. They're still in there. Drilled out Monopoly dice and put them on a guitar. I went into the garage and used Dad's drill, and I drilled out Monopoly dice, and I put some crazy glue in there, and that's that. And then the rest of it is just customization, because I wanted it to be mine. I don't care about, what's original on the guitar anymore. I have to play it. We were making it up as we went. So yeah, I've recorded Stray Cat Shred and Rock This Town on this, Runaway Boys, all the Stray Cat stuff.
Quite a lot of the time, some of the experimental aspects have been accidental. It's just been us not just being not mindful of convention, but actively being ignorant of convention. Like 97 was the first Verve record that had a Pro Tools rig on it, for example. Yeah. And so for me, that was an immensely liberating experience, having the machine in the corner where I could go and treat my own playing as this plastic thing that I could take apart and reassemble. Your outsider status is actually to your advantage, really. Knowing instinctively when to kind of throw correct practice out the window. What's separating one artist from another is the quality of ideas or the originality of ideas. The danger is, the cliche about the internet is that taste is becoming normalized, and so is practice. Practice is becoming normalized as well. It's too perfect, and people are pursuing perfection. I think the lesson of technology is that perfection isn't all that, really.
That is where all of this lands. Rock guitar was never only about having the best tool. It was about what happened when the tool pushed back. The amp was too small. The speaker was torn. The strings were too heavy. The guitar was backwards. The tuning would not hold. The player could not feel his fingertips. The standard sound was already taken. Every limitation forced a choice. Fix it, replace it, or turn it into your sound.
A lot of people didn't like it. It's so different. Everything that's new isn't always liked straight away. And the people are very fearful of change.
Because at first it was just completely polarizing. When we played, it was just like the room would clear. My favorite bands were the bands that were room clearers anyway, so.
It's just like, it's a real freshness, real attitude of not compromising.
It's just a piece of wood, it's 6 wires, it's a few electronics, a cord, and some pedals that who knows if there's a ceiling.
The wrong gear changed rock because it forced players to stop sounding correct. And correct is usually where music goes to die quietly in a nice shirt. The great sounds came from people who made the thing work anyway. The cheap thing, the broken thing, the ugly thing, the thing that would not stay in tune, the thing nobody else wanted, the thing that made the room clear until the right people stayed. The right gear gives you what you ask for. The wrong gear sometimes gives you what you did not know you needed. And if you are stubborn enough to follow it, that wrong thing can become the sound everybody else spends the next 50 years trying to copy. The wrong gear forced the right people to become themselves.